The frost still clung to the windows of Mercy General Hospital, thin and crystalline, like tiny breaths frozen midair. Inside, 12-year-old Lily Chun leaned close enough to fog the glass. She traced a fingertip across the cold surface and watched her reflection blur, her pale face and scarf smudging into a shape that hardly looked human. Outside, the park waited beyond the parking lot, bare branches outlined against the morning haze. It was the same park she had been watching for months, the same bench beneath the same oak tree, though today the sight of it stirred something restless inside her. Her mother returned with 2 cups of coffee, the paper lids steaming faintly in the cold light. Elena looked tired in the way people only look after long months of hospitals. She tried to smile. When Lily turned, "You should rest," she said softly, already knowing the answer. "Can we go outside instead?" Lily's voice came out small but sure. "Just for a bit. I feel strong today." Elena hesitated. Her eyes moved from the IV poles beside the bed to the narrow shoulders under Lily's sweater. "You sure? Dr. Martinez said fresh air's good for me," Lily said. She pointed to a folded paper bag on the nightstand. "I made lunch. For us." The pause that followed was full of the quiet hum of machines. Then Elena exhaled through her nose and smiled with a kind of surrender. "All right, little warrior," she said. It took almost 10 minutes to get downstairs. Slow steps, deliberate breaths, the squeak of the wheelchair over linoleum. When the elevator doors slid open, the air changed. The sterile smell of antiseptic gave way to something sharper, cleaner, almost alive. Lily breathed it in like she'd been waiting all her life for air that hadn't been recycled. The park was nearly empty. The bench she liked stood under the old oak tree, its wooden slats veined with frost. Elena brushed it off and spread a scarf across the seat. Lily sat down carefully, feeling the rough grain through the fabric. The sun was weak, but its light made the frost glitter like powdered glass. She opened the paper bag. The waxed paper made a crisp, private sound. Inside were 2 sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, cut into triangles the way her grandmother had once done, and a handful of apple slices sealed in another small bag. She took a bite, and the sweetness filled her mouth. It was the taste of home, of before. "You okay?" Elena asked, her voice soft with habit. "I'm good," Lily said, chewing. Better than good. For a while, they sat like that. Birds shuffled somewhere in the branches. The faint rumble of traffic came from beyond the hospital wall. Then the sound changed. A low hum began to rise from far away, an irregular rhythm at first, then steadier, heavier, louder. The ground seemed to join in, vibrating softly under Lily's shoe. "What's that?" she asked. Elena turned, shading her eyes. "Engines," she said, her tone uncertain. The noise grew until it filled the air. The first motorcycle burst into view, chrome catching sunlight like a mirror. Behind it came another, and another. 10, 20, 30 maybe, all rolling through the park gates in a column of motion and color. The sound was overwhelming but not hostile, like thunder that had decided to keep its distance. Lily's sandwich paused halfway to her mouth. She had never seen anything like it. The riders moved with purpose, their jackets dark and heavy, patches stitched like battle honors. The leader's beard was streaked with gray, his shoulders wide beneath leather. The words on his back read, "Hell's Angels," curved like wings. The group slowed and parked in the lot beside the park. Engines shut off one by one until the noise collapsed into silence. A faint ringing filled the space left behind, the kind of quiet that follows something powerful. The lead rider swung his leg over the bike and stood. He moved stiffly, favoring one leg, and Lily recognized the way pain lived in his body. It was a language she spoke fluently, He limped to a picnic table near her bench and sat down with a small grunt, trying to hide it. Without thinking, she asked, "You okay, mister?" He looked over, startled, then smiled. His eyes were bright blue, startling against his weathered skin. "Been better, little miss," he said, his voice low and rough. "Just resting these old bones." "I know about bones," Lily said simply. "Would you like half my sandwich?" He blinked, as if unsure he'd heard right. Behind him, other riders stretched and unpacked food from saddlebags. Yerki, water bottles, trail mix. But he looked down at the small triangle she held out. "That's mighty kind," he said finally, his voice softening. "But I couldn't take your lunch." "It's peanut butter and jelly," she said. "I made two." Her tone left no room for argument. After a moment, he accepted it, his big gloved hands almost comically gentle with the small piece of bread. He took a bite, chewed slowly, and gave a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "Well," he said, "that's the best thing I've eaten in weeks." Lily grinned. "Told you. Name's Marcus," he added after a beat. "Most folks call me Bull. Because you're strong," he chuckled. "Deep and warm. Something like that." She extended her hand with grave ceremony. "Lily." He shook it as if it were made of glass. For a moment, their eyes met, and something passed between them. A recognition, a mirror of pain that had learned to wear gentleness. A few of the other riders wandered over, drawn by curiosity. A woman with a silver braid and eyes like polished metal introduced herself as Rita. A huge man whose tattooed arms looked like murals said his name was Tank. They carried the scent of road dust and gasoline and sun, but also something unexpectedly clean, like freedom. "We're on our way to Phoenix," Rita said, crouching to Lily's height. "Charity ride for kids fighting cancer." "Like me," Lily said before Elena could speak. Rita nodded, her expression softening. "Exactly like you." Bull's jaw tightened when he heard the word. He glanced at the hospital bracelet on Lily's wrist, the scarf covering her bare head, the pale hollows under her eyes. Then he looked away, swallowing hard. Grief moved behind his expression like a shadow trying to stay unseen. "You're a fighter," he said. Lily shrugged. "I'm trying." Elena had been circling the path, letting her daughter have space. When she returned and saw the cluster of bikers around the bench, she froze. Her posture changed. Protective. Cautious. "Lily," she called. "Mom." Lily waved eagerly. "Come meet my new friends." The riders turned respectfully toward her. Bull stood with effort, straightening to his full height. "Ma'am," he said, "your daughter shared her lunch with me, reminded me what good tastes like." Elena hesitated, then stepped closer. Something in his eyes, a steadiness she recognized from people who'd already lost more than they could say, quieted her alarm. She took his offered hand. "Elena Chun." "Marcus Henderson," he said. "Bull." He gestured toward the others. "Rita." "Tank." "Part of our California chapter. We ride for a cause," Rita said gently. "For kids who need a few angels on their side." Lily nodded, bright-eyed. "Angels for angels," she said, tasting the phrase like it was magic. The bikers smiled at that. Tank lowered himself cross-legged beside the bench, surprisingly agile. "That's right," he said. "We help raise money, visit hospitals, make sure the kids know they're not fighting alone." "How long you been in treatment?" Bull asked quietly. 8 months, Lily said. 4 more to go. "That's a long road," he said. "Yeah," she replied, "but the destination's worth it." Something in Bull's chest tightened. His daughter, Sarah, would have been about this girl's age now. For a moment, the weight of 23 years pressed against his ribs. Then he reached up, unclipping a small patch from his vest, not the main one, the smaller one that read, "Family." "With your mom's permission," he said, "I'd like you to have this. It's for people who remind us what family really means. Elena's throat tightened. She nodded once. Bull pinned the patch to Lily's jacket. The metal clasp clicked softly, final and ceremonial. "There," he said, "honorary member for the day." Rita added a tiny guardian bell from her keys, its chime clear and bright. Tank placed a silver dollar in Lily's palm, worn smooth from years of travel. "These will keep you safe," Rita said, her voice trembling slightly. For a few minutes, the park belonged to them alone. Leather and laughter and cold sunlight. Then Bull glanced at his watch and sighed. "We've got miles to cover," he said. Elena stepped forward. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "Maybe I do," Bull said. "Your daughter reminded me why we ride." He reached into his wallet and handed Elena a business card. The edges were soft. The print faded from years of being carried close. "If you ever need anything, you call. The Road family doesn't forget its own." Elena took it. "I will." The riders mounted their bikes. Engines rumbled alive again. Not thunder now, but heartbeat. Steady. Reverent. Bull was the last to go. He lifted one hand in farewell, then disappeared with the others around the corner. When silence settled back over the park, Lily stood very still, the guardian bell ringing softly in her pocket. "That was good," she said finally. Elena smiled, the first unguarded smile in months. "Yeah," she murmured. "That was good." They made their way back to the hospital, the sun warming their backs. In the elevator, Lily held the business card against her heart, its worn edges pressing faintly into her palm. Back in her room, she placed it on the bedside table, square and precise beside her paper bag. The machines resumed their rhythm, the beeping steady and kind. She touched the new patch on her jacket, feeling the tiny bump of metal beneath the cloth. Outside, the engines were long gone, but in her chest, the echo of them lingered, warm, rhythmic, alive. She closed her eyes and smiled, the smallest, truest smile she'd worn in months. By late afternoon, the light in Lily's room turned the color of weak tea, thin and slightly sweet, as if the day itself had been steeped too long. The frost that had rimmed the window at morning had vanished, leaving faint chalk maps along the glass where cold once held. On the rolling table beside the bed, the guardian bell rested near the business card and the worn silver dollar. When the heater breathed on, the bell gave the smallest nudge, a hush of a sound, like a reminder to keep paying attention. Elena sat barefoot in the visitor chair, with her legs folded beneath her, a paper cup of coffee cupped in both hands as if it were a small animal in need of warmth. She watched Lily without staring, letting her eyes drift to the window and back, giving her daughter privacy inside the same room. 8 months of practice had taught her how to stand guard without a shield. "Do you want the apples?" she asked, gentle as steam. "In a minute," Lily said. Her fingers grazed the patch under her jacket, found the tiny ridge of the clasp, the neat bump of metal tucked beneath cloth. The word family sat warm against her ribs. With her other hand she rolled the silver dollar across her palm, feeling the soft edges that time had rounded. It felt like a promise shaped by many hands. She set it on the bell and watched it gleam. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked. "That I like how the bell sounds," Lily said, "like a small thing that knows its job and does it." Elena smiled. "You did a brave thing today," she said. "Sharing is easiest when there is plenty. It is harder when there is just enough." "I had 2 sandwiches," Lily said with a practical shrug, and he looked hungry. She touched the business card with one finger. The print had faded a little, the corners softened by years of being carried close. "He said we can call if we need anything." "We will not," Elena said too fast, as if the words had stepped on each other. Lily turned her head. Elena pressed her lips together and breathed. "I mean," she said, "we will only if we need to. I am grateful. I just do not want to owe anyone." "We do not," Lily said. "It was a sandwich." Not a contract. Elena gave a small laugh, the kind that startles itself. Okay, she said, and the word softened the room. Evening gathered itself around the building. The hallway settled into a softer rhythm. Wheels keener, voices lower. Dr. Martinez came in at shift change, with his tie loosened and his smile patient. He scanned Lily's chart with a fingertip, then asked about the park, the way he sometimes asked about dreams, as if both might be useful medicine. Any dizziness? He said, only the ordinary kind. Lily said, define ordinary, he said, playing along. The kind that sits down when you think about peanut butter and jelly, she said. Then we will add sandwiches to the regimen, he said solemnly. He noticed the bell and the coin and the card without touching any of them. The way a good physician learns to notice what does not belong to medicine and still matters. Labs look steady, he said. One more round and then we reassess. Small victories still count as victories. After he left, Elena clicked on the bedside lamp. The light pooled warm at the edges, turning hard angles to softer ones. Outside, the parking lot lamps blinked on in a patient sequence, one and then another, like a slow, polite applause. Lily ate the apples, let the sweetness clear the last taste of hospital from her mouth, and asked for a second blanket. The day had used her like a battery. Elena tucked the blanket around her and smoothed the scarf over Lily's temple, with the practiced tenderness born on the first day of fear. Lily's eyelids dipped, lifted, dipped again. Sleep, Elena whispered. You will not miss anything. What neither of them could know was that across town and across other towns that did not yet know they were included, Bull had already begun to turn a small act into a motion. He sat on the edge of a low motel bed that had learned too many bodies. A red neon sign outside blinked and unblinked, time itself marking the curtains. He had showered with a wafer of soap and dried his beard with a towel more memory than fabric. His left leg had negotiated a truce with him for the night. He set his phone on his knee and took one slow breath. Not prayer exactly, but something that understood ritual. He scrolled the people who could turn intent into arrival. Tommy, Tank, Rita, Arizona operations, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico. He did not need to think about order. Order had been rehearsed by road and rain and years of stubborn showing up. Tommy, he said when the first line connected. It is Bull. Cap, came the reply. Awake in a second. You stuck somewhere. Better than stuck, Bull said, and told the story as if truth were a tool that needed careful handling. He kept it plain. Park bench. A sandwich cut into triangles. A girl who wore a scarf, and the word leukemia without apology. The sound of a bell that had found its job. He said her name out loud so the phone could carry its weight. Lily, he said. Lily Chun. On the nightstand he arranged the things that mattered out in daylight, even though it was night. Wallet. Folding knife closed. A thin notepad. The duplicate of the business card he had handed to Elena. The number that never slept. He wrote down each name he called, and the time he called it because writing steadied him. It was a habit built across miles and misunderstandings, a private chain of custody for good intentions. He called Tank even though they had spoken only hours before. First ring tomorrow, he said. If the schedule allows, we roll back by the hospital. Copy that. Tank said, I will make a list of things that last. Headphones, soft socks, chargers, pens that do not smear. I will put the word out. Rita answered on the second pulse, voice warm with purpose. I saw her, she said before he could speak. I know. We will do more. Bull said, we will do it right. I will call the hospital administration first thing. Rita said, we keep to their rules, or we do not do it at all. She sounded like both nurse and writer, and something older than both. And Bull felt the knot in his chest ease a notch. He rang the chapters that could move without spectacle. He did not sell the story. He named it Arizona Moves, Nevada Rolls. Colorado pulls on cold weather gear, but does not complain. New Mexico says say when and means it. Each yes dropped into the dark like a pebble, and though he could not see the ripples, he could feel the pattern they would make. Between calls he typed a message, because even men who prefer voices know that printed words hold people to promises. He wrote with the care of someone engraving metal. Send word. He wrote, Lily Chun at Mercy General. 3 days. Show up right. He checked the clock and spoke the time aloud, the way you speak coordinates before you set out. Speaking pinned it down. He pictured the screenshot that would later serve as a simple receipt if anyone needed proof. Experience had taught him that even kindness sometimes asks for paperwork. Back at the hospital, the air quieted, the heater went still, and the bell fell silent. Elena tucked her feet deeper under herself and let her head tip against the chair, meaning to rest her eyes for a minute and waking nowhere. Inside that minute, the room smelled faintly of linen spray and the last of the apples. Lily hovered in the gentle space between sleep and waking, where the day plays itself in small, perfect loops. She felt again the soft click of the pin and the way chrome finds the sun, and the whole memory felt like a hand cupped around a candle. Morning arrived pale and early. A nurse with quiet shoes rolled the vitals cart in and offered a good day that sounded like a promise. The cuff hugged Lily's arm, and the stethoscope pressed cool and familiar against her skin. How is the pain? The nurse asked. Like a dull song I know the chorus to, Lily said. Try toast. The nurse smiled. Toast is kind to mornings. After meds, after Elena slipped down the hall for a quick shower, Lily propped a notepad on her knees. She wrote 2 names at the top, careful block letters as if she were labeling drawers. Bull, Rita. She added Tank because his name felt like a steady thing. She drew little circles and began a list the way people begin bridges. Headphones, soft socks, gel pens that do not smear on dry skin, puzzle books, where the answers add up. The hospital did what it could, but she had learned that usefulness is a kind of medicine, and she understood doses. Elena returned with 2 cups of tea that smelled better than they tasted, and set one near the bell, so that the steam moved the clapper and made a single bright note. What are you making? She asked. A list, Lily said. For when they ask, if they ask, Elena said, not to correct, only to keep the future from rushing them. They will, Lily said, not a boast, just a conviction that floated rather than sank. Before rounds, Dr. Martinez returned with a young student in a clean white coat. He introduced the student by first name only, and did not allow the new eyes to linger on the bell, or the patch, or the card. He listened to Lily's lungs and nodded, wrote a note, and set his open palm on the rolling table, as if to steady it for the road ahead. Energy will dip today, he said. You spent some of it out in the world. The body mails a bill after joy. I will pay it, Lily said. Good, he replied. I like a patient who understands economics. When he left, Lily turned the silver dollar between her fingers and pressed its smooth face to the patch for the length of a breath, as if the two could talk. Do you think they will come back? She asked. Elena could have said, let us not expect too much, or we will only be hurt. She could have said strangers owe us nothing. She could have wrapped the day in caution and set it high on a shelf. Instead, she said, I think you are hard to forget, and let that be the truth in the room. Out on the interstate, Bull finished the last call and set the phone face down on the notepad. He read the names he had written and the time he had spoken and stood slowly, feeling the reasonable ache of purpose settle into his bone. He pulled on his boots, slid the notepad into his vest, where he kept things he might need without thinking, dropped the closed knife into his pocket, and put his wallet where it had always lived. He lifted the phone and read the message once more, not to change it, only to look at the shape of what he had asked the world to do. Send word. Lily Chun, Mercy General. 3 days. Show up right. He turned off the lamp. The room collapsed to neon and shadow, and the steady pulse of trucks passing in the dark. He nodded once. The small private nod men give when there is nothing left to decide, and let the plan move forward as if it had its own legs. In Lily's room, the bell chimed once, a bright pinprick in the quiet, and Elena stilled it with 2 fingers without thinking. Small thing with a job, Lily murmured, eyes closed. Doing it, Elena said. The list on Lily's lap grew precise. The card stayed square on the table, its softened corners telling the truth about miles and years. The patch held its gentle weight against Lily's ribs. Outside, the morning did not look different yet. Inside, something had already shifted course, quiet as a bell and just as sure. Morning came thin and bright, the kind of light that sharpens every edge and makes hospital paint look newly dried. Lily woke before the first set of footsteps reached her door and lay still, listening to the small orchestra that never stopped. Vents breathed in long, slow measures. Wheels whispered over waxed floors. Far away, a printer murmured its quiet truths. On the rolling table, the guardian bell did not move, yet she felt it anyway, like an answer. Getting ready. Elena stirred in the chair and rubbed the sleep from her face with the heel of her hand. She smiled in that careful way that meant both permission and guardrails. Toast, then labs, then a walk if you are steady, she said, as if negotiating with the day like a polite neighbor. Lily nodded. The patch beneath her jacket pressed a small certainty against her ribs, the word family warming with her breath. Breakfast arrived with the clatter of a tray that someone tried to make gentle. Lily ate half a slice of toast and a spoon of eggs, and discovered she did not hate either. She lifted the worn silver dollar into a blade of sun and watched it flash. When she set it down, the bell gave the lightest touch, as if winking. The new sound began under the ordinary sounds. A rumor braided into the building. At first it felt like one delivery truck, then another, then something layered and steady. The window trembled in the smallest way, the same shy shiver she had felt days before. Lily turned to the glass. Elena, mid-sip of tea, paused and followed her gaze. Engines, Lily said, certain without being loud. Elena crossed to the window and drew the blinds with careful fingers. The parking lot lay below, striped and obedient, with the empty order that belongs to mornings. At the far edge a shimmer stirred where the pavement met the air. 2 motorcycles turned the corner and rolled in. Then 4. Then a ribbon that thickened and kept arriving. Chrome catching winter sun. Black jackets moving like a school of fish that had decided to become land. Lily sat straighter. Her heartbeat did not race. It chose a rhythm that felt remembered. The column curved into the lot and fanned into lanes with a precision that was not about spectacle. Helmets tipped, hands signaled, kickstands dropped in a quiet clink, one after the other, like a row of small conviction. Oh, Elena breathed. The word held awe and worry and a thread of relief, as if some heavy door had finally swung on its hinges. Oh! Nurses drifted past the doorway and stalled, one hand on the frame, eyes bright the way. A child's eyes brighten when a parade turns out to be real. A volunteer pushing a basket of picture books slowed and craned her neck. Downstairs, the security guard at the lobby desk spoke into his radio with a respectful urgency, the kind people use when they are sure they will be asked hard questions and intend to answer honestly. Lily pressed her forehead to the cool glass and traced the view for the one person she knew would be there. She watched for a particular economy of movement, a way of standing up from a bike. When a left leg does not love sudden obedience, she found him at the center of the flow. Sun lit the gray in his beard. His gaze scanned and settled, and then, as if some compass inside him had found true north, lifted to the window where she stood. His grin was quick and private and precise, like a man finding a landmark exactly where the map promised it would be. "There are so many," Elena said, voice pitched to soothe, something skittish. Her hand went to her pocket where the business card waited. She drew it out and set it on the table, then picked it up again, as if the weight might change between one breath and the next. Below, order bloomed from arrival. Riders did not swarm the door. They arranged themselves along the edges, leaving clean corridors where ambulances and families could pass without friction. Two people in bright vests walked the rows, palms up, no shouting, guiding late arrivals into neat line. A pair opened saddlebags and pulled out bouquets wrapped in paper, the stems dark and wet as if they had been cut this morning. Another pair unfolded signs and leaned them against a low wall. Someone raised two portable poles and drew a length of cloth between them. The breeze opened the letters the way a hand opens, one finger at a time. "Lily's Angels," it read, and the words landed in Lily's chest with weight and warmth at once. A knock at the door snapped the spell without breaking it. Dr. Martinez stepped in with his eyebrows already lifting. "There appears to be a rather large gathering outside," he said, the way a man might announce rain. "The front desk reports an unusual uptick in visitor interest." "They came for Lily," Elena said, and heard in her own voice the wonder she had been trying not to risk. Dr. Martinez crossed to the window and considered the scene with the steady curiosity of someone whose job is to meet the unexpected and make it ordinary. "This is novel," he said, and then, because he was who he was, added, "which means we will need a plan." In the lobby, the security guard kept one hand on his radio and one hand free for hello. The automatic doors sighed open and closed with each new admission of cold air and leather. The first riders to step inside had removed their helmets without the glare of those shells. Their faces looked like faces you might pass in a grocery aisle, weathered and decent and older than some of the stories told about them. A woman with a silver braid carried a clipboard and a pen. She offered both before anyone could object. "We will sign in," she said. "We will go only where you allow. We will not block any lane you name. We will be quiet where quiet is required, and loud only where you tell us it is safe. We are here because a girl shared her lunch." The guard blinked and nodded because there are moments when a script is too small and a person has to be larger. He passed visitor stickers across the desk. He pointed to a line of benches and asked for patience. The benches filled with the patience of people who know institutions are built one rule at a time. No one argued when told only a handful could go to the pediatric floor at once. They began to draft a schedule on scrap paper, and the scrap paper did not seem to mind being asked to hold something important. Elena's phone felt heavy and deliberate in her palm. "Call him," Lily said. Without taking her eyes from the window, Elena dialed the number on the card. The line rang twice. "Elena," Bull said, answering with relief, as if they had been talking all along and had only now unpaused. "Are you responsible for what is happening outside?" she asked, attempting to keep humor out of her voice and failing just enough to tell the truth. "Word travels fast," he said. "How is our girl?" "She is at the window," and has not blinked since the banner unfurled. Elena said, "How many of you are there?" "Last count near the lot is about 300, he said, and then added, "Because precision is its own kind of kindness, and more are on the way from neighboring states. We will keep it orderly. We will follow every rule. We did not come to make work for your people." Elena exhaled the breath she had been holding since the first engine rolled in. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to." "We do," he said, and he made it sound like gravity. Dr. Martinez turned from the window and looked at the bell and the coin and the card, as if assembling a case from quiet evidence. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, smiled at Lily with a softness that had survived many harsh mornings, and spoke in the tone people use when they have decided to trust their training. "Hospital policy does not cover motorcycle gatherings," he said, "but policy can be a living thing when it needs to be. If you feel up to it, we can arrange something careful and brief." A nurse leaned in, excitement wrapped in professionalism. "There is a group at the desk asking about patient Lily Chun," she reported. "They seem quite certain she is expecting them." "Am I?" Lily asked, voice small and steady. "I believe you are," Dr. Martinez said. "We will need chairs at the side entrance, warm blankets, sanitizer at every arm's length, and a path that stays clear. I will speak to administration. Someone tell me where I should stand, so that I am not in the way." Elena lifted the phone again. "We will come down," she told Bull. "If we do it properly, we will bring the quiet inside with us." He promised, "We will bring joy too." Set to low, downstairs. The first riders stepped aside to let a mother with a stroller pass. The move looked choreographed by decency, not by command. Rita was already at the nurse's station, coordinating names and stickers, her voice low and exact. Tank unspooled a roll of tape and laid a line on the floor to mark a clear pathway, then stood beside it like a guard who had taken an oath. On the pediatric floor, windows filled with faces, children pressed their foreheads to glass, and fog bloomed like pale flowers. A boy patted at his bare scalp and grinned at his reflection. A girl with a glitter bandage across her chest pressed her small palm to the pain and left the shape of courage there. Lily could have cried. Instead, she lifted the bell and let it ring once. Bright and clean. She set it back exactly where it belonged. Elena wrapped a warm blanket across her legs. A nurse rolled in a wheelchair and smiled with all her teeth. The chair looked like every chair Lily had used, and yet when she settled into it, it felt like a new thing, as if the day had built it. "Ready?" Elena asked. "Ready," Lily said, and she was surprised to discover it was true. They moved into the hallway, and the hallway moved with them. Nurses stepped aside and allowed themselves a soft clap. Once or twice, the sound of paper folding itself into a bird. The elevator doors opened the moment Elena pressed the button. A coincidence the three of them chose to accept as a sign. In the descent, Lily watched the numbers light one by one and kept her breath steady the way she did for needles and news. The lobby opened around them like a held breath released. The smell of leather threaded the air without crowding it. The riders nearest the entrance straightened without drama. Bull stepped forward. He had taken off his gloves and tucked them into his belt. His eyes looked the way metal looks when someone polishes it and stops at exactly the right moment. "Hey there, little sister," he said, and dropped to one knee so that no one would be looking down at anyone. The bell in Lily's pocket found itself and chimed once. The sound traveled farther than such a small note should travel. Heads turned. The banner outside breathed. The lot beyond the glass stilled in a kind of reverent pause. At the desk, the security guard lifted his radio and spoke softly into it. Not to command, but to witness. "They are here for her," he said, They think she is expecting them. The lobby did not so much fill as gather, like a choir finding the same breath. Attention leaned toward Lily without crowding her, a soft tilt that made space rather than stealing it. Bull stayed on one knee until the nurse set the brake with a gentle click, then rose only when Lily's gaze met his, and gave a small nod that felt like permission. Rita waited a step behind with a clipboard hugged to her ribs, a pencil tucked behind her ear as if music might ask for notes. Visitor stickers blossomed across leather and denim like pale blossoms, names printed in careful block letters that tried their best to behave. Tank stood by the bright tape line he had laid on the floor, palm resting on it, as if it were a promise he intended to keep. Near him, a small cluster of riders held paper sacks and grocery bags, with the patient calm of people waiting for a green light. Elena smoothed Lily's scarf once, not to hide anything, only to honor the ritual of care. She met Bull's eyes over the soft knot, and found steadiness there, the kind that does not need volume to be heard. "We have a few minutes," Dr. Martinez said, stepping into the circle, as though he had always belonged to it. "We stay by the doors. Fresh air helps. If anyone feels tired." We pause. He did not say who would define tired. He did not need to. The doors sighed, and the morning stepped in. Outside, the banner breathed on its line. Beyond it, the line of bikes looked like punctuation holding a sentence open. The air carried winter's clean bite, a thread of leather and road dust, and something warm Lily could not quite name. The riders parted without being told, making a lane wide enough for chair and nurse and Elena's steady hand. A stranger might have thought the choreography was rehearsed. In a way it was, not by script, but by a shared certainty about how to move when stakes are human. A man with a guitar stepped from the edge. His jacket hung open over a faded shirt. He strummed once, listening to the pitch in the air, then softer, letting a mild chord settle like a blanket. Another rider brought a harmonica to his mouth, cupped it with both hands, and set a low ribbon of notes beneath the guitar's pattern. No one called for quiet. The room simply found it. Voices softened to a hum. The nurse beside Lily's chair angled a small bottle of sanitizer from one palm to the next and passed it down the lane, the way people pass water at a campfire. Hands received it and made a quiet shine. Rita crouched to Lily's eye level, braids sliding forward over her shoulder. "We brought a few things," she said, voice pitched low and friendly. "Would you like to decide where they go?" Lily nodded. Words felt crowded in her throat, but they lined up when she needed them. Elena shifted so Lily could see the table the riders had made of their arm. Tank opened the first paper sack. Brown paper rustled. Soft socks rolled in bright bundles came out like small pastries. Headphones sealed in clear sleeves. Gel pens in a keyed rainbow. Puzzle books, whose covers promised answers that make sense. Phone chargers coiled neatly with elastic ties. "A list," Lily said, breath catching but steady. "I made a list." Rita's smile tipped with recognition. "I thought you might," she said. Bull hovered at the perimeter like a watchman who understands gates. "Tell us where." "Little sister," he said. "We will follow the map." Lily pointed. "Socks to the nurse's station. They know who needs warm feet. Headphones and chargers for the chaplain's cart. He visits everyone, even when they say they do not need visiting. Pens and puzzle books for the playroom shelf. And save some for the rooms at the end, where kids pretend they cannot leave, but they are scared to miss the good parts." "On it," Tank said, already moving with two riders at a pace that was the opposite of rush. People along the line shifted to let them pass, and then closed the lane again, as if they had practiced that too. Families arrived in ones and twos, pulled by rumor that had grown legs. Some wandered in from regular appointments. Cafeteria, coffees in hand. Parents kept a palm on a small shoulder or the back of a sweatshirt. Teenagers hovered at the edges, found no one warning them away, drifted closer, and stayed. A boy in a hoodie held his backpack strapped like a life rope. A woman who looked like someone's aunt wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and laughed at herself for doing it. A hospital volunteer with a box of visitor badges approached with the soft power of someone who makes rules feel like kindness. She handed out stickers and markers and directions to bathrooms and guided people to the tape line. When children wandered forward, she crouched and spoke the way Lily liked to be spoken to, with words that did not carry pity's weight. The music settled into a steady pattern, as if sunlight had learned to play, the harmonica stitched in and out, sometimes leading, sometimes following, never asking for more space than it needed. The rhythm felt like walking beside someone you trust, not fast, not slow, matching steps without counting. A father wheeled his son forward, the chair twin to Lily's. The boy wore a knit cap tugged low, and a small bandage peeking from his collar. He looked first at Lily, as if she were the reason to be downstairs at all, then at the row of bikes and the banner that made a promise he wanted to hold. He raised a hand from the blanket and gave a shy wave. Lily waved back, a wave that admitted both shyness and courage. The boy's grin flashed like a light, and the grin moved down the line the way sparks find dry tinder. Bull tipped his chin toward Tank. Tank stepped in, kneeling easily to the boy's height. The way men who have known war relearn tenderness. "Would you like to sit on a bike with the engine off?" he asked. Not a tease, a real offer. The father's mouth opened and closed, then opened again. He nodded, shook his head, and nodded once more because some choices hold fear and joy in the same hand. A nurse with them gave a small, precise nod that meant, yes, with care. Tank slid his arms under the boy with the reverent steadiness you use for something that matters more than your own bones. The boy did not cry out. He put both hands on Tank's shoulders, closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them for the shining machine. When Tank set him on the seat, the boy reached for the bars and took them with a seriousness that made the room hold its breath. A phone camera clicked, but even that sound felt dressed up for the occasion. Rita moved as if her nurse's radar still hummed under the leather. She paused to talk quietly with a woman whose fingers would not stop worrying the seam of her sleeve, and then with a grandfather who needed a chair and would never ask. She tucked blankets, fetched water, pressed a tissue packet into a reluctant palm. She came to stand with Elena, shoulder to shoulder, watching Lily take everything in. "You all right?" she asked. Elena nodded. The word she wanted splintered and became something larger than a word. She swallowed. "Thank you," she said. "I do not know how to take this much grace without wanting to pay it back twice." "You already did," Rita said, not pitying but recognizing. "You said yes to a day that asks for courage. That is a currency with its own rate." Dr. Martinez stopped hovering and allowed himself to belong to the scene. He shook a rider's hand like the beginning of a long conversation. He untangled a line with a gesture that made space. A woman appeared with a tray of cookies, as if kitchens had been waiting for a cue, and he accepted a paper plate as if it were a specimen, then laughed at himself, then ate and looked younger for the time it took to chew. Elena crouched and lifted her phone with the reverence of someone photographing her own heartbeat. The screen showed Lily's face lit by more than light, a composure that only work earns. The banner hovered behind her like a caption the day had written. Elena took the picture and did not check it, because sometimes you accept a gift and refuse to look for the receipt. A mother with a baby in a carrier stepped forward as if into surf. "My daughter was diagnosed last month," she said, voice thin and fierce. I have not slept. I did not know I could bring her here and not break. Elena placed her hand on the carrier's fabric. As one might touch a veil. You will not break, she said. You will bend until you learn how far and then farther than that. And one day, you will breathe without noticing that you are brave. The mother's knees softened and then held. She nodded, let her eyes fill, and did not apologize. A custodian whose key ring sang when he walked set down his bin to help a rider unfold a stubborn chair. The hinge clicked open. Like a rebuke to despair, they exchanged names, shook hands, and both looked bashful at how good it felt. The music brightened a step, a modest lift as if morning remembered it could become afternoon. A young rider with a tidy braid began a soft clap. Children picked it up first, then parents, then nurses pretending they needed the clap to track the beat for safety. The clapping did not tip into cheering because cheering would have been the wrong verb. It stayed a rhythm, a march, a heartbeat. Bull spoke to a cluster of riders holding bright balloons. His hands open, his voice low. They nodded, spread out, and tied the strings to benches and the low ramp rail. Color gathered itself and refused to be anything but glad. Elena kissed Lily's temple through the scarf. Do you need to go back up? She asked. We can go any time. Nothing important will leave. Not yet, Lily said, and the words came out steady. I am not done seeing. Bull returned and took his place beside her chair. Not to tower, but to keep watch. You see what you made? He said. Not a question. Lily turned and found his gaze waiting, edges lighter than in the park. I shared a sandwich, she said, and let the rest remain understood. He dipped his head, as if she had saluted. A teenage boy with a thin scar along his collarbone stepped forward, hugging a sketchbook. He glanced at Lily, then at the page, then back. Could you sign this? He asked, and the request sounded right. Lily took the pen. The gel ink slid easy. She signed her name on a page full of motorcycles drawn from memory and longing. The letters came out neat and sure. He pressed the book to his chest, as if a door had opened inside it. Upstairs, doors propped open on the pediatric floor. Let music climb the stairwell and pour along the hall. A nurse leaned against a frame and cried into her sleeve where no one would notice. A social worker texted her supervisor that there is a kind of order down here that makes me believe we can do this forever. The volunteer with the badges nodded toward the elevators. We can bring more down if the flow keeps moving, she said. Rita tapped her clipboard, and riders traded places with the unshowy grace of people who know when to hold and when to pass. Tank returned from the playroom with empty hands and a grin that looked like healing. The puzzle shelf looks like a library now, he said to Lily. The kids are already arguing about glitter pens. Good, Lily said. Argument means there is a future to plan. Dr. Martinez checked his watch. Not to end anything, only to learn the new measure of time inside this morning. He touched Elena's arm. A few more minutes, he said softly, then we give her a rest. Elena nodded, grateful for a boundary love might have missed. Fullness, not fatigue, eased Lily back a fraction. She watched faces and hands and the way people find the best of themselves when given a chance. The bell in her pocket kissed itself once. A bright stitch running through the room. The guitar softened. The harmonica held a last thread of sound and let it go. Murmurs rose, not louder, just more. Rita pressed the clipboard to her chest for one breath, then lowered it and leaned close to Lily, her voice a secret shared between conspirators. We came prepared. The lobby found a steady breath, not quite silence and not yet celebration. A held note between verses that warmed the air around Lily. The family patch pressed a calm pulse against her ribs. Guitar and harmonica stitched a low ribbon through conversations. A melody that trusted the room to carry it without fraying. Order lived here now, not as a rule forced from above, but as something people chose together because it made kindness travel farther. Rita leaned in, her braid brushing the clipboard. "We will do one more round to the stations you marked," she said, voice soft and certain. "Then we begin the upstairs loop for those who cannot come down. You set the order, Captain." Captain landed on Lily like a bright secret the day had earned. She nodded and pointed with quiet authority. Her list, no longer paper but muscle memory. Chargers with the chaplain. Pens and puzzles divided. Half for the playroom, half for the long hallway where afternoons grow heavy. Socks to the nurse station. Save 2 small bags for late afternoon, because afternoons can be mean. "On it," Tank said. He and 2 riders moved along the tape line with the neat economy of a pit crew, not hurrying and never drifting. People stepped aside and then stepped back, the lane opening and closing like breathing. A volunteer with a badge box floated after them, printing names in careful letters and noting times, so the record kept itself without fanfare. Dr. Martinez checked the clock on the wall and then the watch on his wrist, not to rush but to understand the measure of the morning. He caught the charge nurse's eye and lifted his chin toward the elevators. 5 more up, he said, a small signal that made the whole thing feel procedural rather than fragile. A father returned, as people do when they want to confirm a miracle has not slipped away. His son sat taller, knit cap tilted like a crown. A paper wristband circled the boy's arm with a motorcycle bell clipped to it. "We will bring the bell back upstairs," the father said, awe and relief braided in his voice. "We will use our inside bell." Lily nodded, as if she had written that rule herself. Inside bell for upstairs. Elena crouched beside the chair. 10 more minutes, she murmured. "Then we give the body what it asks for." Lily did not argue. 10 more minutes felt less like a deadline than a promise to treat joy as a serious thing. At the front desk, the security guard set a thin blue folder on the counter and tapped it with 2 fingers. "Administration would like a quick look at the plan you mentioned," he said to Rita, not to stop it, to file it. He almost smiled on the word file, as if filing had become a way to bless rather than bury. Rita crossed over, braid moving like a pendulum. Inside the folder, a sign-in sheet was already peppered with careful signatures and time. The times stood in tidy columns, a quiet chorus of witness. "Here," she said, sliding 2 pages from her clipboard. "Proposed schedule. Areas to avoid. This lane stays clear." She printed in even lines, "Side entry only for groups. Masks upstairs. No engines turned on while any patient is outside." She hesitated, and then added a line that felt like a small invention. "Code word for a crowd. Pause is quiet hands. Because hands travel further than voices." The guard nodded, newly impressed by rightness arriving with its own paperwork. He fed the pages into the desk printer. The machine hummed and laid copies in the tray, one sheet after another. Small sighs of approval in plastic and light. Bull stepped to Elena's shoulder and kept his voice low. "They asked how we knew to bring numbers and rules," he said. "I told them the truth. We learned early that kindness without boundaries can make a mess." He opened his palm to show his phone, not a boast, a tool. The screen glowed with a message thread. The top line was the one that mattered. "Send word. Lily Chun, Mercy General. 3 days. Show up right." Beneath it, a capture of call logs placed times in a neat ladder. 22:14 sat first. Clear and ordinary. "May I?" Elena asked. He turned the screen so it faced her. She did not touch it. She memorized the shape of the numbers as if they were coordinates. "Evidence breathes better when it is simple," she said under her breath. Then she nodded once, A professional acknowledgement. Across professions, thank you for keeping a trace. Rita returned, slid a copy of the plan under her clip, and handed another to the guard, who sealed it in a plastic sleeve and taped it to the side entry glass. The tape made a crisp little sound, official and kind. A volunteer photographed the page for the hospital feed and drafted a caption in her head that read, "This is how a joyful surprise stays safe." Elena felt a buzz in her pocket and let it pass. Not every bell must be answered the instant it rings. Upstairs, a nurse parked a tablet on a rolling cart and opened the group chat for the pediatric floor. Messages bloomed like small lights. "Bring down Nathan if he feels strong." Someone typed, "He is pretending not to care." Another line appeared, "Music is reaching 5 East." A third followed, "The toddler in 9 is dancing." Even the emojis held themselves back a little, as if confetti, too respected protocol today. Riders returned from their small missions with empty hands and easier faces. Tank wiped his palms on his jeans and leaned to Lily. The long hallway is arguing about the glitter pens. The chaplain is now the king of chargers. The nurses are rationing socks like winter diplomats. His report sounded like a field update after a good cert. Lily nodded, solemn as an officer, and checked the list with her fingers as if it were carved there. "Play the song with the hopeful middle," Rita told the guitarist. He caught it on the first chord. The harmonica slipped in a breath later, cutting a gentle furrow through the air that everyone could follow without being told. A teenage girl in a wheelchair rolled forward with her mother steady behind. The girl's hair had begun to return in soft curls that looked like promises you refused to brag about. She held a disposable camera still in its crinkly sleeve. "Would you take our picture?" she asked Lily, formal as a ceremony. Lily cradled the camera like a fragile animal. She aimed, waited for mother and daughter to look at each other rather than the lens, and clicked. The sound was old-fashioned and right. A sound that means you will wait for the image, and the waiting will become part of the keeping. The volunteer with the badges drifted by, counting, without looking like she was counting. She raised one hand at shoulder level, palm open. "Quiet hands," she said with a smile. The phrase traveled down the line and back like a ripple, a test of a code that would hold when needed. Elena studied Lily's face, the way a navigator studies the sky. Color still good, breath even, eyes bright without burning. "5 more," she said softly, glancing at Dr. Martinez. He nodded. 5 more. Bull cleared his throat, not to seize the room but to ask it gently to listen. He tapped his boot twice against the tile, a sound more felt than heard. The guitar eased to a low bed of notes. Conversations thinned. He did not climb anything. He stayed level with everyone, keeping the air unaltered. "We do not have to say much," he said, voice even. "We came because a girl cut her sandwich in half when she did not have to. We brought what we know how to bring. Hands, miles, a way to stand where standing is needed." He tipped his chin toward Lily without pointing. "We take our cue from the person who showed us how to do it." Lily felt the room turn and did not shy away. She had no speech, only a bell and a patch and a coin and a list. She lifted the small bell from her pocket and rang it once. The sound threaded out and came back, clean and quick. "Thank you," she said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The thank you felt like a receipt returned with a signature across the bottom. The charge nurse touched Rita's elbow and nodded at the elevators. "Time to trade groups." Rita lifted her palm again. "Quiet hands." The hush moved like water over stones. Badges changed shoulders, with small flourishes of marker and plastic. The tape line stayed bright. The plan on the glass held its corners. A mother who had hovered at the back stepped forward with a neat stack of envelopes. "These are fuel gift cards," she told the guard first, because permissions still felt like the right direction. "For families who drive far, we keep a few on hand. We always have extra." The guard took them with both hands as if receiving a sacrament, then placed them beside the blue folder. "We will log them," he said, as if logging now meant honoring. The printer hummed again and fed out a new sheet. The volunteer slid it into the sleeve beside the plan. "Visitor rotation. Pediatric area. Sunday." The heading read in plain letters. Below, columns of time blocks and group names, and one simple note at the bottom, coordinated with security at 11:12. The minute stamped itself without drama. Echo had arrived, not as a flourish but as a fact. Bull watched Elena read the page, then glanced at his phone again, almost shy about what he had already shown. 2214 waited exactly where he had left it. Rita looked over his shoulder and whispered, "Perfect. The story will want an anchor." She did not mean papers. She meant memory. Dr. Martinez crouched by Lily's chair and tilted his head. "How does the economy look?" he asked. "Any new costs coming due?" "Fare today," Lily said. "I can pay after a nap." He smiled, and the smile belonged in a ledger under credit. Elena's fingers found Lily's wrist, a light press that meant we are still a body with a plan. "3 more," she said, and then upstairs, a teenage boy with a sketchbook hovered near the edge, courage arriving in 2 waves. He opened to a fresh page. He had drawn not only bikes now, but the tape line, the badge box, the bell, the clipboard, the plan taped to glass. He had sketched Lily's hand holding the camera steady for the other girl. He looked up and did not ask for anything. Lily nodded anyway. A contract without terms. The guitarist widened the hopeful middle and then let it ease. The harmonica set down a high note, as gently as a glass on a table. Even the light seemed to have taken its lunch and come back kinder. Rita checked her watch and read Elena's face. "Upstairs," she suggested. Elena nodded. Lily tucked the bell and the coin into her pocket and lifted her hand in a small farewell. The crowd answered with a forest of quiet hands, palms up like a wall built from air. The nurse released the brake. The lane opened. The banner breathed. Balloons tugged at their strings as if eager to follow and content not to. The security guard lifted his radio and spoke in that soft, new tone he had learned today. "She is heading back up now," he said. "Keep the lane clear. Keep the quiet." In the elevator, Lily watched reflections gather on the metal doors. Scarf and jackets, and Elena's hand on the rail like a captain's. She felt tired but not emptied. Through the closing gap she saw Bull tilt his head toward Rita. They counted something invisible together and nodded as one, like people who had agreed on a number without saying it out loud. The doors closed. The car rose with a kind and certain hum. Above them the plan on the glass held steady. Below them the printer cooled beside a page that anchored a promise to a minute. And when the elevator chimed at their floor, Lily knew the next thing would begin with a breath. And with Bull clearing his voice to speak, rest kept its promise. Lily slept the kind of nap that resets the horizon. Not long and not thin, just enough to fold the morning back into order. When she woke, the room held the warm hush of late afternoon. Elena sat near the window with a paper cup cooled in her hands, and the look of someone who had let the light move, and allowed her thoughts to follow without trying to win. "How do you feel?" Elena asked. "Like my body charged enough to turn the page," Lily said. She pressed her palm to the pocket where the bell and the coin rested side by side. A small agreement felt rather than heard. The family patch warmed against her ribs, as if the nap had set a soft glow behind it. Below, the day had changed keys. Riders rotated like a tide that knows how to keep its shape. From the 5th-floor window, Lily saw the banner breathing on its line and the neat lanes still held by bright tape. The plan taped to the side door caught the low sun and flashed once. A square of order pinned to light. A gentle knock. The nurse with quiet shoes leaned in. "When you are ready," she said. "They have set a small place outside the side entrance. Not a stage, only an even square of floor with a table and 2 chairs. The doctor asked if you would like to come down. If not, we can bring the important part up." "We will go," Elena said, and then looked to Lily as policy rather than courtesy. Lily nodded. The nap had cleared a pocket of strength inside her. This felt like the right place to spend it. The elevator hummed its even song. In the descent, Lily watched the numbers glow and practiced the steady breath she used for needles and news. The doors opened onto a lobby that had learned how to hold joy without spilling it. Quiet hands lifted as the chair rolled past. The lane shone. Guitar and harmonica rested in their cases, their own brief sleep before whatever came next. Outside, the air kept winter's last clean bite. A small folding table stood beneath the banner. At its center lay a blue folder, a hard-edged envelope, and a sheet inside a clear sleeve. 2 pens rested parallel like rails. A modest speaker on a tripod waited, a tiny green eye winking every few seconds. As if breathing with them, Bull stood near the table with Rita at his shoulder and Tank a pace behind, hands loosely joined like a man who respects a detail. His vest was brushed clean, the patch edges tidy, the scuffs on his boots left honest. When he saw Lily, he did not wave. He let his face do the work. Lines eased, corners lifted, and his gaze crossed the space like a bridge built of attention. Dr. Martinez came through the side doors with the security guard and the charge nurse. The guard carried a date stamp, the kind that lives behind desks and turns minutes into facts. The charge nurse held a clipboard already edged with the day's plan. She gave the badge volunteer a nod. The volunteer answered with quiet hands, and the hush went out and returned like velvet drawn over a room. Bull touched the small speaker and tested it with a single word. The green light blinked twice. Satisfied. He did not start at once. He let the stillness settle around the faces and then set his voice into it, even and unforced, the way a man speaks when nothing is for sale. "We came because a girl cut a sandwich in half," he said, "and you know that part. We stayed because support without a return address is only noise. We are here to put our names on what we mean." He tapped the blue folder once, not for show, for orientation. "In here is a letter that says exactly who we are adopting, and for how long. It names the pediatric ward in this hospital. It promises to return, not when it is easy, but when the calendar asks. It lists what can be counted and what cannot." Rita opened the folder and laid the first page flat. The paper was thick and unpretentious. The first line read, "Letter of Adoption of Ward Partnership." Below, chapter names were printed like a road stitched across a map. A second sheet listed roles instead of individuals, a choice that let families keep privacy and held the writers to their work. Bull lifted the hard-edged envelope and held it so the light ran along its seam. "This is a cashier check from pooled emergency contributions," he said. "It is made to the foundation this hospital uses for pediatric care and research. It is not a promise if it is money that is already money." He set it down and raised the clear-sleeved page. "And this is a wire confirmation for the same amount already moving, because sometimes paper travels slower than intent, and we wanted them to meet in the middle." The charge nurse rolled a small cart forward. With the dignity of a procession, the guard placed the stamp on the table, its date wheels already aligned. Bull glanced at Elena, not to single her out, only to show he understood her language. We learned early that kindness without receipts can develop holes, he said, so we brought receipts that breathe, simple and clean. If anyone asks how this happened, you can point to a minute. He turned the clear sleeve so the bold line faced the crowd. The line did not shout. It simply waited with quiet certainty. It read, "Confirmation issued at 1547. The date spelled in plain words that carried their weight without ceremony. Rita placed a pen in Bull's hand and another in the doctor's. Dr. Martinez did not make a speech. He signed in a straight, tidy line and printed his name beneath. The guard took up the stamp, pressed it to the corner of the clear sleeve, and lifted it to reveal a neat box where date and time were married to ink. He looked almost surprised by how satisfying it feels to do that with joy. Bull signed below the list of chapters, big and plain as a road sign. You can read at speed. Rita added her name where witness asked for it. Tank printed his given name where logistics lived. A word he liked, because it means the work that gets things where they belong. A nurse stepped forward with a hospital header form titled Donation Intake. It would live in the foundation office and in the ward records. She wrote the amount in words rather than numbers, so no one could misread it. Her pen taking its time along the long line, she handed the envelope to Tank, who passed it to her with a nod, and she added the time of receipt in tidy letters and initialed the margin. Chain of custody, Elena thought, and felt a private ease settle in her bones. No one cheered. Cheering would have been the wrong verb. What rose was a breath, and a sound that belongs between approval and relief. A whisper moved that a table waited under the trees with casseroles, gut fruit, and water. The whisper did not turn into a crowd. It stood where it was until it was called. Bull placed his palm on the blue folder, the way you touch the hood of a machine you respect after a long run. He looked at Lily and then back to the faces. "There is one more thing," he said. "The letter says once a year, but the road knows the way more often. We have riders within a day's ride, and riders who do not mind farther. We keep our jobs and our families first. This is family now, too." He lifted a small silver pendant shaped like wings, let Lily see it for a breath, then tucked it close again. "Family means someone answers when you call." The doctor stepped to the mic for only one sentence. "On behalf of the hospital and the families, for what can be counted and what cannot, thank you. We will hold up our end." The security guard lifted his radio and used the words he had learned to trust. "Proceed with quiet hand," he said. "Keep the lane clear." The sentence went out like a low wave and came back as a family with a stroller passed, the small wheel kissing the tape and staying within the line without being told. Rita slipped the adoption letter into a second sleeve. Tank tucked the cashier check into a zippered pouch and handed it to the nurse, who wrote the receiving time in the corner and placed the pouch in a satchel with a clasp you could hear. The guard taped the wire confirmation beside the plan on the glass. He smoothed the edges with the flat of his palm so no corner could curl. Lily lifted the bell and rang it once. The note carried to the curb, up the windows, and down the hallway, where a toddler paused mid-dance and clapped twice on pure instinct. The single chime felt like a seal pressed into warm wax. Bull exhaled, and with that breath, let the hinge swing from vow to practice. He lowered the mic and spoke without it, letting his voice find people where they stood. "We will see you again," he said. "Not as a storm, as weather you can count on." The guitarist found a chord that sounded like a road at sunset. The harmonica laid a ribbon through its middle. People eased toward the tables, slow and polite. A rider carried a tray of water cups past a row of chairs and waited for each hand to choose. The plan on the glass shone once more, and then settled into afternoon. Elena bent to Lily. "A few more minutes or inside?" she asked. "A few," Lily said. She watched the second sleeve meet the first on the glass. She watched the green eye of the little speaker blink its steady blink, as if it were taking notes in a language of light. She watched the guard step back to see his tape lines hold like true measurements on a map. Parents drifted in gentle eddies, some toward food, some to the bench, where the social worker sat with a notebook, used not to take names, but to take needs. Nurses conferred in pairs, pointing not at problems, but at solutions that had just become possible. The custodian rolled by with his bin and asked Elena if she needed an extra chair for later. She said yes, and meant more than the chair. Bull came at last, not to take space, but to return it. He crouched so the world would not be looking down at anyone. "Anything missing from your list, Captain?" he asked. Lily thought. She traced the crease in the paper on her lap and chose to read it for what it wanted to be. "Quiet hours," she said. "A place outside where people can sit together without talk. When words are heavy." Bull nodded once, as if he had been waiting for that angle. "We can build that with benches and shade, and a sign that says exactly what you said," he replied. He did not add promise. He did not need to. Dr. Martinez checked his watch and touched Elena's arm. "Let us trade the air for a softer chair," he said. "The body has paid well today." Elena squeezed Bull's shoulder, the squeeze of a long-shared task done right. The nurse set her hand to the chair's handle. The crowd opened a lane without theater. Quiet hands lifted. The banner breathed. The little speaker blinked and steadied. As the chair turned, Lily looked back. She saw the blue folder closed and flat, the pen aligned beside it, the clear sleeve on the glass, with the time like a star inside it. She saw Rita's braid flash silver in the lowering light. She saw Tank kneel to smooth a twitch of tape, a small, exact gesture, satisfying in the way right things are. The elevator doors opened. The lobby took them in with the same care it had given to letting them out. Upstairs, the corridor smelled of lemon and warm blankets. Elena set the brake. The bell and the coin rested warm in Lily's pocket. The patch sat steady against her ribs. She lay back and let the pillow take her. Below, motorcycles idled, then started, then moved in polite waves toward whatever the road asked next. The check would be walked to an office with a lock and a ledger. The wire would find its number and turn potential into present. The letter would live in a drawer that got opened more than drawers usually do. From the hallway, very faintly, a harmonica finished a line and set it down. In Lily's pocket, metal kissed metal, the small sound of agreement, and on the glass below, a minute held its place for anyone who might someday ask how the day chose to keep its word. Evening arrived by degrees, not a curtain dropping, but a careful hand, turning the light lower until edges went gentle. The lot breathed out. Music receded to a thread, and then to a memory. Engines stayed patient. The banner under the tree learned the slower rhythm of night, and lifted once like a chest settling after a long good cry. From the window, Lily watched the plan and the wire confirmation taped to the glass, their corners smoothed flat, so they looked less like documents and more like frames holding a promise in place. Down below, the writers moved the way people move. When the main thing is finished, and what remains is the kind of work that tells the truth about who they are. Tank folded chairs with unhurried hands that made each hinge sound like a kept intention. Rita tied bags and traded nods with the custodian, who stacked them as if stacking weather barriers in neat rows. The charge nurse walked the tape lane end to end, not policing it but blessing it for holding all day. When a corner lifted, Tank knelt and pressed the edge once with the blade of his hand until the adhesive remembered itself. Elena stood beside Lily, and let the quiet lower into her shoulders. The day wore itself across her body, like a tally finally adding up without hurting. The bell and the coin in Lily's pocket were a small weight against her hip, a metronome that did not need to be heard, to be felt. The family patch was warm against her ribs, a low-banked coal. The nurse, with soft steps, returned with 2 clean blankets that carried the scent of cotton and lemon. She laid one across Lily's legs and set the other around Elena's shoulders without asking, a gesture that carried both knowledge and consent. "If you would like the outside air before night rules begin," she said, "the side entrance is open and the lane is clear." She did not add that people were waiting. She did not need to. They rode the elevator again. Slower. The car, a hollow, where breath lined up with breath. The lobby had exchanged its choir pulse for the hush that remains after a service when the faithful put books back where they belong. Outside, the air had taken one polite step toward Cole. The little speaker slept with its green eye closed. The plan and the confirmation on the glass held steady in the slant of evening. Bull waited near the now bare table, his hands resting in his vest, as if warming themselves on an engine that no longer needed to run. When he turned, he looked the same, and also eased around the edges, like a rope untwisting after the load is set down. He did not walk to them at once. He let Lily arrive and let her see him standing still. Then he stepped forward and stopped at a distance that asked a question. Lily's small nod answered it. "Thank you for today," Elena said. The words fit the lock without scraping. Bull dipped his head, a salute across equal work. "We have a little more of it," he said, and the sentence did not press for permission. It offered shape. Rita joined them with a thermos and paper cups, and poured a narrow measure of warm cider that felt like a holiday folded into a small space. "You are cleared for 1 sip each by the kindest nurse on the floor," she said, and Elena laughed, and Lily smiled, and the guard at the door pretended he had not heard, and also pretended he had approved. Families drifted past in gentle lines, some toward home, some toward an in-between place, some toward a longer far. Good nights were soft and exact. A mother lifted her palm to Lily and touched her own heart, a sign they both understood. The teenager with the sketchbook lifted the book once like a lantern and then tucked it close again. The boy with the knit cap rolled by, and the bell at his wrist caught the last light and answered itself without ringing. When the drift thinned, Bull placed his palm on the table, as if asking it to witness. He glanced at Rita, then at Tank, then at Elena. He looked last at Lily. He did not speak at once. He reached inside his vest and took out a small leather pouch that had learned a hand over years. The drawstring was dark, where fingers had worked it, and tied it, and worked it again. "I carry this for a reason," he said, his voice quiet and unforced. "I have been waiting for the right shape of reason to appear." He loosened the string and tipped the pouch into his hand. A pendant, shaped like wings, slid into his palm with the weight of a truth, silver catching low light, and giving it back without glitter. He did not lift it for the crowd. There was no crowd now. He held it so that Lily and Elena and the 2 riders could see. "My daughter wore this," he said. He did not say her name, because the day had already learned it, and held it with care. She wore it the way a child wears protection without boasting, like a coin in a pocket or a steady hand on a shoulder. "After she died, I put it away because that was the only way I could move. Later, I took it out and carried it against my chest, not as penance, not as superstition, just as a weight that told a man where the front of himself is." He turned the wings once in his palm and looked up. "Today I watched a child make a list and lay order over a day until it made sense. I watched that child say thank you like a signature. I watched a mother stand still and let help be help, without trying to lift it alone. It seems to me the front of a man could learn to live somewhere else now without getting lost. He offered the pendant along a line that passed through Elena's gaze first. Elena's hand rested on the chair handle and did not move. She watched the wings and the man and her daughter's face. Then she nodded once, small and irrevocable, the way the head moves when agreement matches the heart. Lily lifted her hand, and the pendant slid into her palm with a softness that felt like a yes. The cool metal warmed quickly against her skin. She did not put it on. She had learned enough ceremony to know the first wearing should wait until the room understood what it was seeing. She closed her fingers. The bell and the coin in her pocket touched each other with a faint kiss, and the new weight found its place among them. "It is not jewelry to me," Bull said, plain as weather. "It is a responsibility. I could not give it until I knew I was not laying my burden on a child. I am not doing that. I am placing trust where it is already being practiced. Keep it until the day you meet someone who needs to know their own strength and does not. You will know who, you will know when." Rita drew a breath that trembled once and then settled. Tank looked down and then up with eyes that had chosen to keep seeing soft things. Elena placed her hand lightly over Lily's closed fist and held for one count and let go. Lily opened her hand and met the wings with a steady look. "I will take good care of it," she said, promising by the way she breathed. Bull nodded. A circle closed. He drew his worn card, soft at the corners, and set it on the table. With a blunt pencil, he added a single word beneath the number and slid the card to Elena. "Same number as before," he said. "I added a word, pendant, not a code, a line of custody for something that cannot be inventoried." At the door, the guard checked the taped pages and smoothed a corner with the flat of his palm, the motion carrying the satisfaction of a man who has learned his task. Can also be a signature. The custodian rolled an empty cart past and nodded at Elena the way coworkers nod at the end of a well-run shift. Under the tree, a rider folded the banner into a square that would open cleanly when called. Night took the edges of the building in a clean line. Riders left in quiet pairs and trios, departures spaced like commas rather than periods. No engine bragged. Each rumble read like a sentence about distance and patience and return. "Ready?" Elena asked, and the word meant more than doors. Lily nodded. She tucked the pendant into the inner pocket of her jacket, where the cloth would learn its shape and keep it. The bell and the coin settled against it like companions who already knew how to give one another room. They rode the elevator in a hush that did not feel fragile. In the room, Elena set the pendant on the rolling table where Lily could see it. Not an altar, a reminder. Rita stepped in with a nurse and set down a small tray with 2 cups and a card of care notes in tidy script. On the back, in pencil, Rita had written 2 words, "Quiet hours." Elena flipped the card, smiled, and set it by the pendant. Down below, the riders completed tidy work. The plan and the confirmation stayed taped to glass. The little speaker's eyes slept. The air felt like a room that had learned a better way to hold itself. Lily drifted toward sleep and returned, not ready to let go. A gentle knock. Expected. Bull stood in the doorway with his hat in his hands. He did not step in until Elena moved aside. He took 2 careful steps and stopped. A guest in a place where machines sometimes breathe for people, and where quiet is a kind of treatment. "I wanted to say one thing in a room where only the right ears can hear," he said. "The Road family keeps its promises. If you call, someone answers. It might be me. It might be someone I send. It might be a voice you do not yet know. It will be family." "Thank you," Elena said. She meant for the day and for the days after, and the ones after that. Bull looked once at the pendant and then away. Not because it hurt, but because he had given it, and giving sometimes asks you to look elsewhere, so the receiver can look straight at what they have. He touched 2 fingers to his hat brim, a small, respectful arc through the air, and withdrew. In the hall, Rita waited with a nod, and Tank with a ghost of a grin. They were not guarding the door. They were escorting a moment into night where engines could turn without waking children. Elena dimmed the overhead light and left the lamp low. She pulled the blanket to her chin, the way Lily had always liked when stories were read aloud. They did not speak. The room spoke in monitor breaths, and the quiet arithmetic of a body tired in the good way. Near the seam where evening becomes night, Lily lifted the pendant and let it rest in her palm. She held it through 6 slow breaths, and set it back where the lamp could find it. In her pocket metal kissed metal again. The sound, small and complete. She closed her eyes. Morning arrived without theatrics. Pale bars of sun laid themselves across the floor, as if a day wanted to look orderly before it spent itself on surprises. The lot wore its weekday again, but not everything had gone back. The plan still hung on the glass, a square of clarity catching soft light. The stamped minute still held like a faint star, visible if you knew where to look. Under the tree, 2 plastic chairs faced the same direction. No one had forgotten them. Someone had placed them on purpose and left them as a promise kept open. A nurse in a coat came out and sat there with a cup between both hands and did not look at a phone. A father joined her and said nothing for a long breath, and then offered one sentence to the morning that could have been to anyone who loved him. The air held it and gave nothing away. He went back inside. At the desk, the guard wrote a note on a small pad. Quiet hours. Side entrance. Sunrise to mid-morning. He circled the line and left it where the next shift could not miss it. The day had already authorized him. A few blocks away, Bull and Rita and Tank sat at a diner, steam rising from mugs, plates arriving with the kind of efficiency that counts as affection. They did not talk about leaving. They talked about shade, and a bench, and a sign, and names of people who would build quietly for less than cost. Bull set his hand flat on the table and felt the wood grain like a map. He did not reach for his chest pocket. The weight there had moved to a better place and taken nothing he wanted back. In the room, Lily lifted the pendant so the lamp could read the wings. They were not flying. They were simply wings. She closed her hand and felt the shape print lightly against her skin, a small map she could carry. Then she set it down and opened her notebook. At the top, she drew a little box and wrote 2 careful words, quiet hours. She sketched 2 chairs facing the same way, and a strip of shade, and the corner of a sign that said exactly enough. When she looked up, Elena was already smiling, the smile that means the day can begin. The bell and the coin in Lily's pocket made no sound at all, and still she heard them, the way you hear a vow after it has settled into bone. Denver wore a sky that looked newly pressed and held together by clean, bright air. The conference center hummed with the soft clatter of badges and the steady sigh of doors learning the rhythm of welcome. From the wing of the main hall, Lily watched a technician loop a thin microphone over her ear and check the little pack at her waist. He lifted a finger for a tiny test. She breathed once and said 1, 2 in a whisper that landed exactly where it should. The green light blinked approval and then waited. Elena stood behind her, hands warm on the chair, handles the same firm gentleness she used at thresholds and curb cuts. Dr. Martinez stood a pace away with his program folded to the right page, a man who had learned how to keep time without stealing any from anyone else. Rita waited near the rack of cables, with a clipboard in a clear sleeve, that made order look like kindness instead of a rule. Bull leaned one shoulder to a support pipe, watching the room fill, the way a man watches weather, understanding pressure more than spectacle. Tank rested a soft case at his feet, the size of a book wrapped in foam and tape, like something both ordinary and exact. The screen above the lectern carried a simple title that said "When Community Shows Up," and a smaller line that said "Pediatric Resilience and Unlikely Partnerships." The moderator kept the welcome to a paragraph and shaped it like a lane. Then he spoke Lily's name and stepped aside. Lily rolled into light and felt it lay across the family patch like sun on metal gone warm. The first applause rose fast and then softened itself out of respect for breath. She let her lungs remember the mic and spoke. "My name is Lily," she said, and a quiet laugh moved through the room because the voice did not shake and did not pretend to be larger than it was. "I learned something from a peanut butter and jelly sandwich." Her palms rested steady. She did not touch her notes. She drew the bench under the winter tree with words and showed the convoy that arrived without acting like a storm. She used verbs that traveled without pushing. She named money, but not as a headline number, and allowed the room to hear intention, root, and muscle. She did not talk about illness as spectacle. She talked about usefulness as a kind of medicine, and about quiet that could be shared like water when someone hands you a cup. Rita gave a small cue, and the map behind Lily woke from white. A point glowed where Mercy General would live forever in any map Lily drew inside her head. Another point lit, and then another, not as a rush, but as a pulse. Chapters that answered a call, hospitals that answered back, volunteers and parents and staff marked as living nodes, not labels. The pattern looked less like a splash and more like a circulatory system, remembering what it was made to do. "We called it family," Lily said, and the word did not turn sweet. It stayed like a table held steady by four legs you trust. She did not need names. The room understood itself inside the shape of that word. Breath gathered between rows in the hush she knew from the ward, the hush before needles and news, and sometimes right before laughter. Rita wheeled a low cart into the center aisle and set a hard case on top. A thin strip of tamper tape crossed the latch, marked in 2 inks and dated in tidy letters. She turned the cart so the camera could see without peeking and looked to the moderator. On the advice of the hospital, she said, "We bring receipts, even for joy. This is a short record of a day that changed a ward." Everyone shown signed releases before or after when their families asked that their joy be included. Her tone did not turn legal. It turned human. She lifted a clipboard in a sleeve that read "Consent Records Pediatric" and set it down before the gaze could become prying. Tank offered a pocket knife and waited for Elena's nod. One clean slice across the tape wipe of the blade fold of the knife, the lid opened to a clamshell, with a small drive wrapped with a second seal, the same initials, the same careful date. Rita broke the thin strip with a fingernail and handed the drive to the technician, who lifted the cable for the room to see before he clicked it home. The screen filled with the first frame and chose plainness as its style. A plan taped to glass, the words, "Lane stays clear." Masks upstairs, quiet hands printed in clean lines. A gloved finger touched the corner to show a neat stamp that made the minute into a fact. The next frame showed a blue folder. The cashier checked the wire confirmation side by side under a steady hand, and the desk stamp waiting like a small engine that only knows one honest job. No soundtrack pressed feelings onto the room. The clip carried the sound. The images already held. Paper set down, a stamp pressed, and lifted low voices, ordering joy in the language of work. The camera widened to the banner under the tree, and the aisle taped like a ribbon you do not step on. Faces did not hold the frame unless consent asked them to. Ons did. Hands folding and tying, smoothing and passing, lifting and resting, exactly as hands should. The last image was a page slid into a sleeve and taped beside the plan. A heading that said visitor rotation, and a line at the bottom that said coordinated with security, plus a time written as words. The room did not clap. The room breathed and stayed with it. "Thank you," Lily said. And she felt the air grow dense in the good way. She turned toward Dr. Martinez, and he stepped to the lectern for one sentence. "The adoption of our ward is logged in our records," he said. "The funds are booked. The visits are scheduled on a rotation. The nurses help design. It works because someone loved order enough to make space for generosity." Bull waited until the stillness could hold a hard thing, told gently. He did not take the stage. He spoke from halfway down the hall, at a height where people could hear and not crane. "A lot of us learned to carry grief alone," he said. "The road taught us to keep moving. The road also taught us that the front of a person is not always where you think it is. A girl handed me half a sandwich and showed me where the front belonged." He did not hold up medal or mention loss as legend. He let his jaw soften, and he stood straight without bracing. "We are not special, except in the ways anyone can be. We show up. We write our names. We leave a place better than we found it, and we come back." Rita lifted a hand, and the map returned, now labeled with roles instead of titles. Nurses, parents, custodians, guards, riders, chaplains. The pattern looked like a body circulating good work to every limb. "We added something small," Lily said. "2 chairs and a sign for quiet hours. People sit there when they are too tired for talk. The kindness is to leave them alone, and also to stay near. We can share the sign template and the bench plan with anyone who wants them." Questions traveled on little microphones, carried by ushers who walked like librarians. A woman who ran a rural hospital asked about background checks. Rita answered in warm, plain terms. "We work with your standard. Our volunteers agree in writing. We track with your system, paper, or code. The point is not to skip steps. The point is to make the right steps easy." She held 2 sample forms so the camera could catch the headings, and then set them down. A man asked how to keep the story from becoming the point instead of the children. Elena answered without stepping into the light. "Set a plan that directs attention to action," she said. "Say no to things that ask for more of your time than they are worth. Keep receipts that fit on 1 page." She marked the size with 2 fingers, and the room smiled because people like the size of things that can be held. A teenager asked what to do if you are not a nurse or a rider. "Share something small," Lily said. "Sit with someone. Bring pens that do not smear on dry skin. Bring puzzle books where the answers make sense." Her voice steadied around the word answers, and the room lifted with it. The moderator lifted a card that meant time, and Rita set her clipboard down like a gavel. Bull gave the last line shape. "We brought a letter that says we will come back," he said. "We brought money that is already money. We brought a plan you can tape to glass. None of this is secret. We will share it, because it only works if it is shared." The room rose like a tide that knows the moon. The sound was not loud, it was deep. Elena felt it pass through her like a low, clean note. Dr. Martinez pinched the bridge of his nose and then smiled at the floor to gather himself. Rita folded her clipboard to her chest. Tank touched an invisible brim and grinned at no one in particular. Bull pressed 2 fingers to the vest where weight used to live, and for the first time in a long time did not check for what was no longer his to carry. Outside the doors, the lobby behaved exactly the way good lobbies should when people have something to do with what they just heard. A table held clear sleeves, stamped starter packet. Inside each sleeve were the quiet hours kit, the rotation template, a sample consent form that could be shaped to local policy, and one paragraph about money that said only what mattered. Use your foundation. Keep it simple. Date it. Stamp it. Tape it where people can see it. Another table held a sheet that read contact list with columns for roles, not titles, and a volunteer who listened more than she spoke. Elena guided the chair into a quiet corner and let Lily rest. She poured water and held the cup steady. The pendant sat warm under Lily's shirt against her collarbone. In the pocket, the bell and the coin found each other once with a sound no one else in that bright corridor could hear. Bull crouched, so the world would not be looking down at anyone. That went right, he said, and Lily nodded. It did. Rita joined them with the now empty case and the cut strip of tape folded inside like a ribbon, saved not to prove anything again, but because people keep the ribbon when the gift meant something. A coordinator with an operations badge arrived with a printed strip from the console that showed channel live and channel mute in neat lines. "Would you like this for your records?" she asked. Rita slipped it into the sleeve with the consent cover and checked a box on her list that meant a circle had closed. They found the small courtyard with a single tree and 2 benches, already waiting as if the building had anticipated the need to do nothing for a few minutes. Lily lifted her face to the thin, crisp light. The air smelled like sun on concrete, and the mild resin of whatever mulch lay under the shrubs. Elena let her shoulders drop another fraction. Bull set his palms on the bench on either side of him, like a man who knows where the front of himself is and can at last sit without bracing. "We will take this to other places," Rita said. "Not all at once. Right-sized, right-paced, but we will." Lily nodded. The map in her head added a point where this bench lived. She did not need it to glow. It simply existed. She thought of the chairs under the winter tree back home, and the way the guard had circled the words "quiet hours." She thought about how air can hold a sentence for a person who needs to say it and not break. They turned back toward the hall where sleeves and pens and promises now had shapes people could carry. Passing a glass case, she saw her reflection beside the simple poster that had introduced her. She did not look like a headline. She looked like someone who had been given a thing to carry and had chosen to carry it with both hands. Summer memorized the ward the way a careful hand memorizes a key. It arrived early and lingered late and taught the rooms a steadiness that felt like water finding its course. The map that had glowed behind Lily in the conference did not burst into sparks. It thickened like tree rings, quiet and sure, one good layer at a time. Weeks learned their rhythm. The Guardian Angel Network breathed like something alive, because people fed it with attention and left it room to breathe back. Lily spent school mornings in classrooms and hospital afternoons in work that did not pretend to be larger than it was. The pendant rested under her collarbone and learned her warmth. In a binder with a blue cover, she kept the pages they had promised to share. Each page was dated in words and trimmed with margins that looked like lanes. Quiet hours kit, visitor rotation, consent short and consent long. A single clear paragraph about money that said only what mattered. Use your foundation. Keep it simple. Date it. Stamp it. Tape it where people can see it. Execution looked less like speeches and more like paper that behaved. The first pairing after the conference took place in a small procedure room between a girl whose blood counts kept arguing and a muralist in a soft denim jacket who carried drawings rolled like careful weather. Rita set a clipboard on the counter. Parent signature in blue ink. Volunteer's signature in black. Time written in words. A checked box that read materials reviewed non-toxic washable. The artist asked the girl what colors felt like power and unrolled vines that could climb without breaking anything they touched. No one said miracle. They said yes, and they said thank you. And they printed a tiny label that read Art Visit 1 of 6 and placed it on the day where eyes could find it. A week later, Tank stood in the therapy gym with a boy who stared at a prosthesis on a rack the way a kid might stare at a sword in a shop window. Tank lowered his big body until his eyes were level with the boy's eye. He did not sermon the boy about courage. He talked about tools. This is a tool. Tools are for learning. A physical therapist watched with her clipboard tilted like a grin. The form on her lap carried the boy's initials and a line that read, Mentoring Consult Non-Clinical. Beside it the time, beside that a small square where she had written the word yes. Even quiet hours turned into something you could trust. Under the winter tree, the bench gained a second chair and a promise of shade. The guard who had circled the words in his notebook kept a small printed sign at the desk for days. When wind did what wind does. Mornings belonged to a nurse who sat with a paper cup and kept her phone deep in her pocket. Some afternoons, a grandmother came with yarn and made a square, and then another, and said nothing at all. A card laminated in plain font asked kindly for silence to be shared and for nearness to be kept. The network learned how to keep itself honest. A parent raised a question about photographs, and the consent page grew a line that named privacy in language anyone could understand. A teacher asked if reading volunteers could be guided toward books that would not promise easy endings, as if comfort could be printed without cost. Rita wrote a 2-page guide, dated it, stamped it, and sent it out with an open request for edits. When the edits came back, she added a fresh date on the header and tucked the old date into a small box at the bottom so lineage could be seen instead of guessed. Elena found she could breathe through meeting. She kept lists on cards that fit her palm and wrote times in words because simplicity makes truth easier to see. She learned to say no kindly when a bright idea wanted 3 hours for what required 20 minutes. She learned to say yes when the custodian asked if the benches could be bolted, because weather and people sometimes act the same. The work order printed with a number and a time, and Elena held it like a receipt, not from distrust, but because trust should be easy to prove. By late summer, the ward carried a sound that was not music and not noise. It was the hum of right work at a right pace. The visitor rotation lived in its clear sleeve beside the plan, and nurses marked the day with a dry erase pen when the day changed shape. A tray of gel pens that did not smear on dry skin sat where Lily had once pointed. Puzzle books with answers that made sense lived in a labeled drawer, and the label finally justified the price of the little machine that made it. The year turned. On the anniversary of the gathering, the tide returned, not as spectacle but as paragraphs of presence. Riders arrived in strings and commas. The lane tape learned its line in 3 calm pulls, and the banner lifted from its square without a crease out of place. Firefighters rolled in with a ladder that could reach stories and turn them without breaking them. Teachers shouldered boxes already labeled by level and by mood. Officers wore shirts without hard plates and stood where lanes needed eyes rather than orders. A paramedic brought a kit packed with comfort and adhesive for small problems. The doors kept their hinges and remembered to breathe. Evidence stood where it belonged. A permit sat in a sleeve with a clean stamp. The donation ledger waited at the foundation table, and the 2 people seated there had practiced the sentence, "We will send a receipt," and then actually sent it the same afternoon. A whiteboard behind them listed needs discovered in the morning and marked each one with a check when it found its match. Socks, chargers, a ride next Tuesday, at 9 to the clinic across town. Check, check, pending, then check. Lily did not make a speech. She moved through the day like a hand smoothing a wrinkle. She showed a new volunteer where to set water so the lane stayed clear. She reminded a teenager with engines in his pulse that kids climb with permission and helmets, and that a line is not a suggestion. Her voice carried the authority of someone who loves order for the way it keeps people safe, rather than for the pride it might feed. Elena did the work the day asked. She guided a grandmother to a quiet chair and set a cup in her hand and did not fill air that did not want filling. She checked the rotation and slid a visit forward when a rider fixed a flat. She signed one page and left her palm resting on the signature for a breath, the way she rested a hand on Lily's back when sleep finally arrived. As if to tell the page this stays, mid-afternoon Bull found the place where celebration turns private and stepped across the line like a man who respects threshold. He asked Elena with his eyes and waited for her nod. He asked Lily with his stance and waited for her small yes. In his palm sat a small wooden box burnished by years of carrying. He opened it. A thin silver ring with a blue stone caught sky even in shade. This was Sarah's promise ring, he said. It belonged to a girl who did not get to grow toward what she was pointed at. I have carried it in a box, inside a box, like a sentence I could not finish without twisting it. I think it should keep traveling. He did not lift the ring to the crowd. He kept the circle small and true. Only when Elena's gaze met his and granted the right did he offer the ring to Lily. She did not reach fast. She looked the way she looks at plans and benches and lanes. Then she lifted the ring and felt the cool answer of metal slide against her finger and settle there as if the stone had always been waiting for the heat of this new name. I will take good care of it, she said, each word steady as a chain of custody note. Not a burden, a transfer of trust. Bull drew a breath that did not have to fight to get through his chest. He touched 2 fingers to the vest, where weight had once lived, and did not reach for what was no longer his to carry. He did not stand taller. He stood level. Rita cleared her throat the way you reset a page. On her clipboard lines crossed finished tasks and small boxes waited beside the things that needed 2 sets of hands. Quiet hours benches at 2 partner hospitals needed shade. A school requested training so reading volunteers would not promise what a final chapter could not deliver. A parent group asked for a quiet way to keep meal cards where families could find them without feeling exposed. Rita looked from the list to Lily. Lily nodded once, and the list became the afternoon. The anniversary wrote its own montage. The muralist returned with a portable panel so art could travel without borrowing sterile space. A veteran taught 2 kids how to balance on forearm crutches and not rush the second step. A firefighter let a toddler touch a helmet, and then hung it back with ceremony. An officer shifted 3 inches to block sun with his shoulder, while a mother signed a consent without squinting. No one played for cameras, yet a dozen phones caught a dozen quiet beats that would ride home and adjust someone's idea of help. Evidence kept pace without begging attention. The permit sleeve gained a small note near late day that read extended 1 hour, approved with initials and a printed name. The ledger added $50. Then 9 pairs of socks. Then 2 hours from a person who refused a mention larger than the word volunteer. The rotation earned 3 gentle taps of a pen as riders finished rounds and checked boxes without bleeding ink through paper. Evening approached, and the lot taught Celebration how to become order again. Tables folded into a van and reappeared later as shelving at the foundation office. The banner returned to its square without complaint. The needs board moved from the lobby to a wall near the social worker's desk. Next to it, a clean sheet read follow-up schedule and carried 3 dates already set, and one blank on purpose to welcome what the week would find. Lily stood at the head of the lane and watched light catch the ring. The pendant wings, the family patch. She looked like herself, and also like a custodian with both hands on keys she did not need to wear. Bull came to her shoulder with the posture of a man who has learned that leadership sometimes means removing his own weight from the room. "You did not make a speech," he said, and the sentence held a coin of praise. "We had work," she said, and the words felt like a signature written clean. Elena arrived with a clipboard she had not planned to carry, and laughed softly at herself. She turned it over and showed the blank back. "No more boxes today," she said. "Let us go home." Inside, the guard lifted his hand and touched the corner of the taped plan, not to adjust it but to bless it for tomorrow. He had added a line at the bottom, in small, neat letters. "Quiet hours from sunrise to late morning, supervised by whoever remembers to care." He dated it. He did not stamp it because sometimes the truth of a line is the handwriting. In the room, the lamp made a warm circle where the pendant rested beside the blue binder. Lily wrote 2 words at the top of a page. Year 2. She drew a small square for a box and left it empty. That check would belong to later. She capped the pen and let the quiet settle. From the pocket, the bell and the coin touched once. A small private agreement. On her finger, the ring held the evening blue. Lily looked at Elena, and then at Bull, and then at the door where the corridor kept its steady arithmetic. "We leave the place better and we come back," Lily said. "We come back," Bull answered, and something eased like rope loosening after strain. Outside, engines woke in polite pairs and paragraphs, and left behind punctuation that read like promises kept. The bench under the tree held 2 empty chairs facing the same direction. The air above them knew how to listen. It would be there in the morning without asking anyone for a speech. Autumn stepped onto the grounds with light hands and thinner light. The tree by the side entrance learned a new shade each morning, and the benches kept facing the same direction like 2 patient shoulders. The plan on the glass had been recopied in steadier ink. The visitor rotation lived beside it, neat as a calendar that believes in mercy. People still came, and people still went, and the doors kept their hinges without complaint. Inside the ward, the hum settled into something that did not need to introduce itself. Carts rolled soft. Monitors breathed in green and blue. Gel pens that did not smear stayed in their tray. Puzzle books, with answers that added up, found small hands, their corners rounded by use rather than neglect. The pendant rested against Lily's skin, with the calm weight of something that had chosen the right place to live. The ring held a sliver of sky, even on gray days. In her pocket, the bell and the coin met once or twice, and said nothing more. A letter arrived at the foundation office, in a clear sleeve, sealed and signed. The seal was ordinary. The signature was tidy. Elena slit the top and eased the page free. A simple header, 2 plain paragraphs. The first said the hospital had adopted quiet hours as standard practice for families in distress across the campus. The second said a machine that dispensed hot chocolate had been installed near the pediatric desk. The date was written in words. The name was printed clearly beside a signature that did not try to be fancy. Elena handed the page to the social worker who had been lobbying for small comforts for years. The woman pressed her lips together, then let out one quick laugh like a secret, finally finding a chair. Dr. Martinez stood with his hands in his pockets and watched the new machine learn its job. The first cup ran too sweet, the second found the balance. He sipped and exhaled the way a person exhales at the end of a hard chapter that did not end anyone. He carried a paper cup down the hall and set it beside a father who had slept badly on a window ledge. The man lifted the cup and nodded and did not speak. The heir understood. Bull came on a quiet Tuesday without a convoy. The way family arrives when the calendar is not the point. He paused at the edge of the lot and looked at the benches, then at the plan, then at the banner folded square in a bin by the desk. He touched the taped corner as if greeting a well-made tool. Rita had called ahead to say the storage closet needed a second set of shelves. Tank found time. A hardware store offered a kindness discount that did not want a headline. They measured twice and drilled once and vacuumed after themselves and left a note that said, "The shelves were leveled to hold more than anyone planned." During quiet hours, a nurse took her break and sat outside with a cup in both hands. She did not look at a phone. A mother stood a few paces off and watched the line where shade met light until her shoulders let go. Upstairs, a child turned in sleep and settled without waking. At the desk, the guard looked up and down and wrote a small note about replacing a chair cushion, folded the paper, and placed it where the next shift would see it. The note was not urgent. It was exact. Lily returned to school full-time and discovered that hallways have their own lanes and that a schedule can be trusted to carry a person forward. She kept the pendant under her shirt and the ring on her hand and the binder on her desk at the office. After class, she walked to the hospital 3 afternoons each week and sat at a small table near the window where the light behaved. She read letters from volunteers and parents and wrote replies that were short and kind and said what would happen next. She checked dates. She stamped where stamping helped. She taped the plan for the coming month to the glass and smoothed the corners until they held. Work kept making a quiet montage. The muralist delivered a portable panel and 3 small boards for the clinic across town. The boy in the therapy gym learned the pleasure of a straight line with forearm crutches and the patience of a second step. A retiree sat with a grandmother and taught a simple stitch that kept hands busy without stealing thought. A teacher closed a book at a hard page and said they could stop there today, and the children nodded and did not feel cheated. Every hour tucked its proof where work lived. A line on a ledger, a check beside a name, a note that read "Done C file," with a small arrow toward the right drawer. In the evening, Bull asked Elena to walk with him to the courtyard. He stood with his hands on the back of the bench like a man leaning into a truth that does not need force. The pendant was no longer in his pocket. It did not need to be. He said he had been sleeping through the night without waking to check his chest for a weight that had already found a better place to rest. Elena listened and did not fill the silence. Some acknowledgments are better when they have company only from air. Rita kept a clipboard softer at the edges and sharper in the middle. She tracked shade for partner benches and training for reading volunteers, and a quiet way to place meal cards in small envelopes with a sticker that said "for food." She dated her notes and signed when a thing moved from wanted to real. She taught a new coordinator to print names small and times in words, to ask first, to thank always, and to keep forms to 1 page unless a law begged for a second. Tank brought his nephew because the boy asked where good days come from. They walked the lane and looked at the taped plan and at the tray of gel pens and at the banner resting in its bin. The boy saw no glamour and grinned anyway. The grin of a kid who recognizes a machine that runs because many hands choose to oil it. Tank taught him how to carry a box the right way, how to set it down without a sound, and how to nod to everyone Because nodding is one kind of fuel. The office kept a small wall where proof belonged, not trophy. Gift, promises, a copy of the adoption letter, a scan of the first wire receipt, a photograph of the first 2 chairs under the winter tree, with a strip of shade like an arm, a skinny print from the soundboard at the conference that showed when the microphone went live and when it rested, a consent cover sheet with a date circled and the words, "Thank you" in a steady hand. Under it all, a narrow ribbon of paper pinned end to end in small type that read, "Keep this simple." One afternoon, between school and hospital, Lily stood at the side entrance and watched light move across the plan. She had begun to count with beats instead of numbers, breaths, steps, lines. The day did not need digits to add up. It needed names remembered, lanes kept clear, cups handed without comment, chairs set to face the same direction. She touched the pendant through her shirt and thought of the girl she had never met, and of how a ring can hold sky without making a spectacle of it. She thought about how trust travels, and how being a custodian is a form of grateful. A mother arrived with a newly shaved head and a mouth set tight. Lily showed her the quiet hours sign, and did not speak, and then spoke the exact words that belonged to. If you want silence, we guard it. If you want a human, we stay within reach. The mother looked at the bench, and then at Lily's face, and then at the plan on the glass. She nodded once and sat. Elena carried a folder to the desk and set it down for the guard to initial. Inside were copies of the next rotation, a memo about shade on hotter days, and a request for 2 pairs of stacking chairs. The guard signed and added a note about a supplier who would give a kindness discount if asked in person. Elena circled the word "ask" and said, "Thank you," like a woman paying for something valuable that keeps being offered for free. That night, the halls kept their arithmetic and the machines kept their steadiness, and the building slept the way only buildings do. Every hinge relaxed, and every plan under a clean strip of tape. Lily sat at the rolling table with the binder open and a fresh page ready. At the top, she wrote a title in letters that did not rush, Year 3. She drew a small square beside it and left the box empty on purpose. A blank can be a kind of faith. She set down the pen and lifted the pendant and let it warm her palm. She traced the wings as if reading a map that does not need roads. On her hand, the ring held the evening and returned it unbroken. She placed both on the table for a breath and then tucked the pendant back where a vow knows it belongs. Outside, a single bike drifted by, not in a show, not in a rush, just a line of sound that rose and faded and left the air uncomplicated. The benches waited. The sign held its sentence. The plan learned how to share the glow of a hallway lamp. Elena dimmed the light and touched Lily's shoulder, and did not add words to a day that had already spoken well. Lily lay back and let the blanket find her. She closed her eyes and felt the room agree to hold her without argument. In her pocket, the bell and the coin met once and parted the way friends do at the end of a long shift. Morning would come certain as practice. The guard would smooth a corner of tape. A nurse would pour a cup. A child would find a pen that does not smear. A mother would sit on a bench and let the silence keep her company. A rider would stop with nothing to announce and everything to offer. A plan would be dated and stamped and taped where anyone could see it. Lily did not need a speech for any of it. She kept the right sentence close. Learned years earlier, under a winter tree, when a stranger sat down like a man whose bones had finally told the truth. Angels recognize angels over a shared sandwich. The story of Lily's angels reminds us that the smallest act of kindness can start a chain reaction larger than we ever imagine. A half sandwich, shared by a sick girl, became a movement that taught an entire community how to listen, carry, and rebuild trust. It isn't a tale about heroes arriving to save the day. It's about ordinary people remembering that compassion, when done with structure and sincerity, can heal what medicine alone cannot. At its heart, this story is about learning to face hardship without bitterness, to turn pain into purpose, and to use proof, not pride, to sustain goodness. Life will always hand us moments when silence feels safer, when the world seems indifferent or unjust. But gold doesn't fear fire. Integrity shines brightest under pressure. Lily, Bull, and the riders proved that decency can be disciplined, that real strength is quiet, and that justice often begins with one human seeing another and saying, "You matter." For anyone carrying invisible weight, grief, guilt, or old unfairness, this story whispers that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means building something lasting from what tried to break you. Sometimes, the road to peace starts with a single, generous gesture and the courage to follow through. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen one small act ripple into something bigger?